My name is Lila Mercer, and I turned 18 at 12:01 last Monday morning. At 12:04, my father knocked on my bedroom door with a cupcake, a candle, and a smile I had not seen in years. At 12:07, he slid a folder across my desk and said, "Just sign this before school tomorrow. It's only to help the family." At 12:11, I opened the folder and realized my parents were not asking me to help the family. They were asking me to sign away the only thing my grandmother had left me. At 12:18, while my mother stood in the hallway pretending to cry and my brother texted someone downstairs, I smiled and told them I needed a pen. Then I locked my bedroom door, opened my laptop, called the attorney my grandmother had hidden in an old recipe book, and activated the one legal clause my family never knew existed. By 9 a.m., my father's buyer was threatening to sue him. By noon, my mother was screaming that I had destroyed the family. And by sunset, my uncle was standing in a courthouse hallway whispering, "How did she know about the water rights?" Before I tell you what happened at the courthouse, I need to take you back to the summer my grandmother taught me the difference between owning land and understanding it. I was 12 the first time Grandma Celeste handed me a rusted key and said, "This opens the gate, but not the place." I thought she was being dramatic. She was always saying things like that. Grandma Celeste owned 13 acres outside Bellwether, Oregon. Everybody called it the orchard, but it was more than that. There were apple trees, yes, old ones, twisted branches, moss on the bark, fruit that came in small and ugly but tasted like honey and rain. There was also a creek that cut through the back of the property, a little wooden bridge my grandfather built before I was born, a gravel lane that ran along the east side, and a small blue farmhouse with a porch that leaned slightly left no matter how many times someone tried to fix it. To everyone else, it looked like old land. To my family, it looked like money. To my grandmother, it was proof. Proof of what? I asked her once. She was standing beside the creek in rubber boots, holding a bucket of windfall apples. That some things survive because somebody refuses to sell them, she said. I did not understand that at 12. I understand it now. My father, Nolan Mercer, hated the orchard. Not openly. My dad was too polished for open hatred. He owned a roofing company, wore button-down shirts with his company logo stitched on the chest, shook hands with pastors, sponsored Little League teams, and said things like "community matters" to people he hoped would hire him. But every time Grandma invited us to the orchard, his jaw tightened. "Your mother is sitting on a gold mine," he would tell my mom in the car. 13 acres near the highway, and she's wasting it on apple trees and sentiment. My mother, Caroline, always answered the same way. "She'll come around eventually." She never did. Grandma Celeste was my mother's mother, but they were not close. My mother liked clean counters, matching furniture, and things that looked good in photos. Grandma liked dirt under her nails, old wood, and telling the truth before people were ready to hear it. So naturally, my mother called her difficult. I called her safe. When I was 13, my parents missed my winter concert because my older brother Ethan had a basketball banquet. When I was 14, they forgot to pick me up from debate practice because Ethan needed help choosing a suit for homecoming. When I was 15, I got second place in a state science competition, and my father said, "That's great, kiddo," without looking up from his phone because Ethan had just been accepted into a private leadership retreat. Ethan was not evil. That would have been easier. He was just raised like gravity bent around him. He expected chairs to be saved, cars to be available, money to appear, conversations to wait until he was finished. My parents built the whole house around his needs, and I learned to live in the corners. Grandma Celeste noticed. She always noticed. Every Friday after school, she picked me up in her old green truck and drove me to the orchard. We made apple butter, fixed fence wire, cleaned gutters, cataloged old photographs. She taught me how to read property markers, how to recognize the sound of a failing pump, how to sharpen pruning shears, and how to listen when someone says family too many times in one conversation. Family is a beautiful word, she told me once, until somebody uses it as a leash. That was Grandma. Sweet as pie until someone tried to put a collar on you. When I was 16, she got sick. Not suddenly. Slowly. First, she stopped climbing ladders. Then, she stopped driving at night. Then, she stopped pretending she was fine. My mother visited once every 2 weeks, usually with a casserole and a face full of irritation. You really need to think about selling, Mom told her one afternoon while I was washing dishes. Grandma was sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in a cardigan, hands thin but steady around her teacup. And you really need to think before you speak, she said. Mom went red. I'm trying to help. No, Grandma said. You're trying to hurry. My father got involved after that. He came to the orchard with a man named Calvin Reese, developer. Expensive watch, shoes too clean for gravel. He walked the property like he had already mentally bulldozed it. Beautiful access, Calvin said, looking at the east lane. Grandma stood on the porch with both hands on her cane. That lane is private, she said. Calvin smiled. Everything is negotiable. Grandma looked at my father. Not everything. That night, while Mom and Dad argued in the kitchen, I sat on the stairs and listened. She's being selfish, my father said. Calvin is offering 7 figures if we can package the orchard with the Henderson parcel. She won't sign, Mom said. She won't have to forever. I remember that sentence. I remember the way my stomach turned when he said it. She won't have to forever. Grandma died 8 months later. I was 17. At the funeral, my mother cried beautifully. Not loudly, not messily, just enough. People hugged her and told her she had been a devoted daughter. My father stood beside her with his arm around her shoulders, accepting sympathy like a man at a business lunch. I stood by the casket and held Grandma's old rusted key in my fist until it left a mark. After the funeral, my father disappeared with Uncle Graham into the church office. Graham was my mother's brother, a real estate attorney who smiled with all his teeth and never once looked me directly in the eyes unless he wanted something. I walked past the office door and heard Graham say, "If Lila is the named beneficiary, we wait until she turns 18. After that, she can sign." My father said, "She'll do what we tell her." I kept walking. That night, while everyone else ate ham and potato salad in our dining room, I went to Grandma's house. The orchard was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like someone is holding their breath. I used the rusted key on the gate and drove down the gravel lane. Inside the farmhouse, the air still smelled like cinnamon, dust, and lemon soap. On the kitchen table was an old red recipe book. Grandma had told me once, "If anything ever feels wrong, check the apple pie recipe." At the time, I laughed. That night, I did not laugh. I opened the book to apple pie. Between the pages was a business card. Mara Voss, attorney at law. On the back, in Grandma's handwriting, was one sentence. "Lila, when they say it's only a formality, call her." My hands went cold. I called Mara the next morning from the school parking lot. She answered on the second ring. "Lila," she said, like she had been expecting me. I was wondering when they'd start. I sat in my car with the heater running and my backpack in the passenger seat while Mara told me what my grandmother had done. 6 years earlier, Grandma Celeste had placed the orchard, the farmhouse, the creek, the gravel lane, and an investment account worth almost $1.8 million into the Mercer Orchard Trust. I was the sole beneficiary. But there was more. "Your grandmother knew your father and uncle would focus on the house and land," Mara said. "They always do. But the most important asset is not the farmhouse." "What is it?" "The water rights." I frowned. "The creek?" "The creek, the irrigation access, and the easement road. The developer your father is dealing with cannot build on the adjoining parcels without legal water access and the East Lane easement. Your grandmother controlled both." I stared through my windshield at students walking into school. "So they don't just need the orchard?" "No," Mara said. "They need your signature to unlock the entire development project." "How much is the project worth?" A pause. "Roughly 18 million. I almost dropped the phone. "Your grandmother believed they would try to pressure you the second you turned 18, Mara continued. "So she added a protection clause. Once you turn 18, you can activate a conservation restriction and a title freeze. It prevents sale, transfer, development, or easement changes without court approval and trustee consent. Can my parents stop it? Not if you activate it first." First. That became the word I lived with for the next 4 months. First. First to sign. First to file. First to protect what my grandmother built before my family could package it, sell it, and call it practical. I did not tell anyone. I went to school, did homework, took out trash, smiled through family dinners, listened while Dad talked about new opportunities, listened while Mom complained about financial pressure, listened while Ethan talked about needing a new car because his current one was embarrassing. The orchard came up more often as my birthday got closer. Dad started casually mentioning college costs. Mom started leaving brochures for expensive universities on the kitchen island. Ethan joked that if I was suddenly rich, I could help him start his fitness brand. Then, 2 weeks before my birthday, Uncle Graham came over with wine and a folder. He thought I was upstairs. I was not. I was in the pantry, reaching for cereal, when I heard him say, "Calvin needs preliminary signatures by next Tuesday. If we miss that window, he can walk." Dad said, "Lila turns 18 Monday." Then Monday night, Graham said, "Make it emotional. Birthday, family future, your mother's legacy, whatever works." Mom asked, "And if she says no?" Graham laughed. "She's a child, Caroline. Children say no until adults explain consequences." I stood in the pantry with a cereal box in my hand and learned exactly what they thought I was. Not daughter, not granddaughter, obstacle. My birthday party was Sunday night, not because they cared, because I turned 18 at midnight. Mom invited relatives, neighbors, Dad's business friends, Uncle Graham, Calvin Reese, and a few people I had never met but who wore watches like Calvin's. There were balloons, a cake, a banner that said, "Our girl is all grown up. Our girl." I nearly laughed. Ethan gave a toast. "To Lila," he said, lifting a glass of sparkling cider. Finally legal enough to stop being Dad's tax deduction. People laughed. Dad laughed the loudest. Then, my father stood. He put one hand on my shoulder. "Lila has always been quiet," he said. "Responsible, mature. The kind of daughter who understands that family comes first." That sentence landed exactly where he meant it to. On my neck. Like a leash. He continued. "Tonight isn't just about Lila becoming an adult. It's about the next chapter for our whole family. Grandma Celeste left us memories, yes, but she also left us opportunities. And I know Lila is going to help us honor that legacy in the right way." Applause. My mother dabbed her eyes. Uncle Graham smiled. Calvin Reese checked his phone. I stood there holding a plastic plate with cake on it and smiled back. Because timing matters. At 11:52 p.m., Dad knocked on my door. Mom stood behind him, Uncle Graham behind her. Ethan leaned against the hallway wall, curious but bored. Dad held the folder. "Hey, birthday girl," he said. "Can we talk?" I let them in. Dad sat on the edge of my desk like he owned the room. Graham stayed standing. Mom folded her hands like she was about to pray. Dad opened the folder and pulled out a document. "It's not a big deal," he said. "Just paperwork to start moving Grandma's property into a family management structure." "What does that mean?" "It means we all benefit," Mom said quickly. Graham smiled. "It's standard. You're technically named in some of the trust language, so we need your signature to simplify the transfer." Technically named. Simplify. Transfer. Grandma had warned me about words that wear perfume. I looked at the first page. Assignment of beneficial interest. They wanted me to assign my interest in the trust to Mercer Family Holdings, LLC, my father's company, not family. Company. "What happens after I sign?" Dad smiled. "We handle the adult side. You get college covered, a car, and a little money to start your life." "How much money?" Graham answered. $75,000. I looked up. For an $18 million development project? The room changed. Very slightly, but I felt it. Dad's smile froze. Mom blinked. Graham's eyes narrowed. Ethan stopped leaning. "Who told you that number?" Graham asked. I shrugged. "Is it wrong?" Dad stood. "Lila, this is exactly why adults should handle this. You hear one number and think you understand the whole picture. I understand you want me to sign away the trust." Mom's eyes filled with instant tears. She was good at that. Faucet tears. Turn handle. Watch guilt pour. "We are drowning," she whispered. "Your father's company is barely surviving. Ethan's school loans are coming due. We could lose this house." "There it is," I said softly. Dad frowned. "There what is?" "The part where your emergency becomes my responsibility." His face hardened. "You are 18 now," he said. "If you want to be treated like an adult, act like one. Adults help their families. Adults also read before they sign." Graham stepped forward. "Don't be difficult, Lila." I smiled. I'm not being difficult. I'm being early. He did not understand that yet. At 12:01, my phone buzzed. Mara. One text. Happy birthday. Ready when you are. I looked at my father. I need a pen. Relief softened his face immediately. That hurt more than the anger. He really thought I had folded. I'll get one, Mom said. No, I said. I have one. I picked up the folder. Then I walked to the door. Dad said, Where are you going? To make a copy, I said. You don't need a copy. I looked back. That's what people say when they don't want one existing. Then I stepped into the hall, walked into my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. Dad knocked immediately. Lila. I opened my laptop. Lila, open the door. I joined Mara's video call. She appeared in her office, hair pulled back, glasses low on her nose. Did they give you the assignment form? Yes. Do not sign it. I know. Dad's knocks got louder. Mara shared her screen. I'm sending the activation packet now. You sign where marked. Digital notary is standing by. My hand shook when I signed the first page. Not because I was unsure. Because downstairs my whole family was realizing the quiet girl had a door that locked. Dad shouted, This is childish! I signed the second page. Mom cried louder. I signed the third. Graham said something I couldn't hear, but it sounded angry. At 12:16 a.m., Mara said, Done. The conservation restriction is activated. I'll file electronically with the county recorder the moment the system opens at 6 a.m. The title freeze notice goes live automatically. What happens now? Now, Mara said, they can't sell, transfer, develop, mortgage, or alter the easement without trustee review and court approval. And the water rights? Locked. I sat back. Behind my door, my father had gone silent. That was how I knew he was scared. Not yelling. Thinking. At 6:04 a.m., Mara filed the documents. At 8:12 a.m., Calvin Reese's attorney pulled the title report. At 8:19, Calvin called my father. I know because Dad was downstairs and his phone was on speaker. What the hell did your daughter file? Calvin shouted. Dad said, I don't know what you mean. She froze the easement. She froze the water rights. The conservation restriction blocks subdivision. I can't close without that access. Graham grabbed the phone. Calvin, calm down. She's 18. We can challenge it. You told me the girl was under control, Calvin snapped. I put down earnest money based on your representation. If this deal collapses, I'm coming after you. Silence. Then Calvin said the sentence that turned the house cold. And if you signed anything claiming authority over that trust, you better find a criminal attorney. I stood at the top of the stairs in pajamas, holding Grandma's rusted key. Dad looked up at me. His face was gray. What did you do? He asked. I walked down slowly. What Grandma told me to do. Mom sat at the kitchen table, pale, robe pulled tight around her. Ethan looked from Dad to me like he was finally understanding that this was not a family argument. This was legal. Uncle Graham arrived 20 minutes later. No tie, hair messy, phone in hand. He pointed at me the second he walked in. You have no idea what you just triggered. I placed Grandma's key on the kitchen table. No, I said. You have no idea what she protected. Graham laughed once. Bitter. You think a dead woman and some small-town lawyer can stop a development company? The doorbell rang. Mara stood on the porch. Behind her was a man in a navy suit. Good morning, she said. This is Daniel Cho, Trust Litigation Counsel. We're here to speak with Lila. Dad blocked the doorway. She's our daughter. Mara looked at him calmly. She is my client. That was the first time in my life an adult in my parents' house said I belonged to myself. We met in the dining room. Mara laid out copies of the trust, the conservation restriction, the water rights documentation, and the easement map. Daniel Cho spoke quietly, which somehow made him scarier. The orchard cannot be sold. The creek rights cannot be assigned. The easement cannot be transferred. Any attempt to represent otherwise may constitute fraud. Graham said, This is absurd. I'm her uncle and an attorney. Daniel looked at him. Then you should know better. I almost smiled. Dad leaned forward. We're her parents. We have financial hardship. There has to be a family hardship clause. Mara turned one page. There is. Dad's eyes lit up. Then Mara read it. In the event any family member attempts to pressure, coerce, defraud, or manipulate the beneficiary into transferring trust assets, said family member shall be permanently barred from serving in any advisory, managerial, or trustee-related capacity. Mom whispered, "Celeste wrote that?" Mara looked at her. "Celeste lived long enough to know all of you." No one spoke. That was the line. The one line they never saw. Grandma had not just left me land. She had left me a mirror, and they were standing in front of it. By noon, Calvin Reese's attorney sent a formal notice to Uncle Graham and my father. Breach of representation, fraudulent inducement, damages pending. By 2, Dad's business lender called asking about undisclosed liabilities. By 4, Ethan was packing a bag because apparently the house had become too tense for him. Mom spent most of the day crying in the guest bathroom. Dad kept walking outside to take calls and coming back older every time. At 6 p.m., he found me on the back porch. The sun was low. The yard looked almost pretty. He stood beside me for a while before speaking. "You ruined me." I looked at him. "No. You built a plan that required stealing from me. I just didn't cooperate." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand pressure." "I understand it perfectly. You put all of yours on an 18-year-old girl and called it family." He looked away. For a second, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he said, "Your grandmother poisoned you against us." "No," I said. "She vaccinated me." He walked back inside. That night, I drove to the orchard. The gate opened with the rusted key. The farmhouse was dark, but the moon was bright enough to silver the creek. I walked down to the bridge and stood there listening to water move over stone. For the first time since Grandma died, I understood why she had made me learn every inch of that place. The soft fence posts, the property markers, the pump, the orchard rows, the creek. She wasn't teaching me maintenance, she was teaching me ownership. A week later, Uncle Graham resigned from his firm. Officially, personal reasons. Unofficially, Calvin Reese's lawsuit had made people ask questions. Dad's roofing company survived, barely, but the line of credit he expected from the development deal vanished. He sold his truck. Ethan transferred to a cheaper school. Mom got a part-time job at the dental office where she used to complain about the receptionist. Nobody in my family starved. Nobody became homeless. They just had to live without selling me. That was apparently unbearable. Mara helped me move into the farmhouse in August. I enrolled in community college nearby, environmental policy and land management. It felt obvious once I said it out loud. Kelsey from the cabin story would have understood me. Different girl, same kind of promise. On my first night in the farmhouse, I found one more envelope taped under the kitchen drawer. Grandma's handwriting, Lila. Inside was a letter. "My brave girl, if you are reading this, then they tried it. I am sorry. I wish love were enough to make people honest, but sometimes love only tells you who you wish they were. Paper tells you what they can't deny. This place is yours because you loved it before you knew what it was worth. That is the only kind of person who deserves to keep it. Protect the creek, protect the trees, protect yourself. And when they call you selfish, remember this. A boundary only feels cruel to the person who planned to cross it." I sat on the kitchen floor and cried until the sun went down. Not because I had won. There is no winning when your parents become people you need legal protection from. I cried because my grandmother had seen the storm before I did and built me shelter out of ink, signatures, and one rusted key. 3 months later, my father called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. He didn't say hello. He said, "I drove past the orchard today." I waited. "The trees look good." "They do." A long pause. I didn't know she had planned all that. "Yes, you did," I said. "Maybe not the details, but you knew she didn't trust you." He inhaled sharply. I thought he might hang up. He didn't. Finally, he said, "I don't know how to be your father now." That was the first honest thing he had said to me in years. So I gave him the first honest answer I could. "Start by not asking me for anything." He was quiet. Then he said, "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't healing. It was one brick. Some bridges rebuild like that. One brick, then maybe another, or maybe not. I'm not responsible for finishing a bridge I didn't burn. Today, the orchard is still standing. The creek still runs under the bridge. The east lane is still gravel. The farmhouse porch still leans left. Calvin Reese built his luxury subdivision somewhere else. Uncle Graham works contract law from a rented office above a nail salon. Ethan's fitness brand never launched. My mother still sends texts that begin with, "I hope one day you understand." I understand plenty. I understand that family can love you and still try to use you. I understand that being quiet does not mean being weak. I understand that sometimes the person who protects you best is someone who planned years ahead because they knew one day you would be too young, too pressured, and too surrounded to protect yourself alone. Now, I have one question for you. If you could protect one thing in your life, a place, a person, or a promise, what would it be? Tell me in the comments, and if this story stayed with you, subscribe for the next one.